Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, we've got an amazing guest. We've got Dr. Hasan Merali, who's an associate, and we're going to be talking about his book. And this book, he's a pediatrician. So he says, these are some things that are awesome about kids, and there are some things that we can learn from them. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're talking about his book, which is called Sleep Well, Take Risks, Squish the Peas, Secrets from the Science of Toddlers for a Happier, More Successful Way of Life. And so Dr. Murali is an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics, McMaster University, and a pediatric emergency medicine physician at McMaster's Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario. He received his medical degree from Harvard and a master's of public health from Johns Hopkins. You know, heard of those places. His research focuses on child injury prevention in low and middle income countries, and he's published more than 25 peer-reviewed journal articles, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, BBC, Science, Medium, the Boston Globe, NBC, CBC, and Popular Science. He lives in Oakville, Ontario with his wife and 4-year-old daughter, who also likes to squish the peas. So Dr. Murali, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
So in writing the book, it's very research-based, right? You cite a lot of studies in the book. And so I'm wondering, in the process of doing the research, what have been some things, some of the impact on your life?
Yeah, there have been such big impacts. I was lucky that I wrote this book at a time when my little one was in that toddler age. She was between 1 and 3. And so really getting lessons that I was learning directly from her, getting that on paper, and then getting the research, like you mentioned, behind it on how does that map to the adult data. And so I think after all of that research and work, I think the number one thing that has really helped me and why I started my book with Sleep Well is fixing sleep habits. It's especially important for me because I'm an ER doctor, and a lot of people who are shift workers, it's a little bit more challenging. But honestly, if we can fix our sleep, that is such a big help in all aspects of our life, physical and emotional. And so that's probably one of my biggest takeaways that I've taken from this, and what I use and what I talk about in the book is this toddler sleep routine. And so this very simple way that I learned from my daughter about how to get her to sleep, I apply that to myself, and it just works wonders. And the second thing I'll say is another thing I learned from her and all the little people I get to take care of, because a lot of what I do with toddlers is fixing lacerations and casting fractures, because these little people just have no fear. And they just are out there every day taking risks, more confident than they should be. And it's really incredible to watch them. And that's something I really took away from them. You know, I'm someone who likes to write by myself, and I would never have imagined writing a book and getting to that level. But what I really wanted to do is do a TED Talk, and something I never thought I would do. But that happened. It just got released. It got picked as an editor's pick. It's already at 30,000 views in the first 2 weeks. And yeah, that's been really exciting. And it wouldn't have got there unless I took that risk and had that confidence.
Right. So what you're saying is take risks, but the risks that they tend to take lead to injuries. So maybe not those types of risks. Injuries where, you know, at our age, we might not recover as quickly as they do. So risks in terms of maybe things that you don't know if you can do, that you might find you get embarrassed if you don't succeed at, but maybe not the injury risk aspect from the toddlers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. We need to, I think sometimes they're very extreme people in a way that I absolutely love, but we can tone that down, certainly with risk taking in the physical realm in sports and things like that. But also like saying no comes to mind as well. I think the best at it, maybe we can talk about that later, but we could probably do it in a more polite, quieter way than they do.
And so the other thing that you mentioned was sleep. And actually, I've done a lot of episodes on habits, habit formation, maintaining habits, stopping bad habits, right? And a lot of that is really hard if you're not on good quality sleep. So a lot of the keys to lifestyle change are good habits. A lot of things. Oh, I want to write a book. Well, it's really hard to do if you're getting crappy sleep. And the funny thing about it is you learn that lesson from toddlers who screw up your sleep. Yes, they do. They won't fall asleep. They won't stay asleep. They wake up at the crack of dawn. They are personally responsible for your terrible sleep. And yet we're supposed to learn from them that we should be getting more sleep.
Yes, absolutely. They have their challenges, and we'll talk about this. I see them in a very fun way. And sleep is something that I think can be fixed in toddlers and can be fixed with us. And, I don't think there's anyone who benefits more from routine like toddlers do. Like they need to sleep at the same time, have specific snacks and meal times at the same time every day, have nap time at the same time. And I think there's something to be learned from that for us, although we can't be as strict as them and get thrown off as much as they do. Certainly, bedtime is a place where we could implement it. And so, the toddler sleep routine for your listeners and viewers, I just want to go through it because I want everyone to give it a chance if you have any issues sleeping. And even if you don't, just getting on these routines and habits like we're talking about is really useful. So, it starts 1 hour before bed, and you want to try to have a consistent bedtime. Toddlers love to take a hot bath. They just love that. It helps, decrease their core temperature, and that can help us sleep. We can translate that into a bath if you want, or that can be a shower. So that's step number one. Step number two in the toddler sleep routine is some type of hygiene activity. They really like getting lotion, massage, that just touch. They enjoy that. Doesn't have to be that for us. Certainly we can do that. But if you want to incorporate something like brushing your teeth or some type of hygiene related activity, that's useful. And then if anyone has ever been around a little person, they'll know the one thing they ask for over and over again is reading a book. And so they want to end their night with a book. And so that's the third step, is really getting to that state where your screens are completely put away, hopefully at the 1 hour mark before you want to go to bed. And you're just sitting down with that book. And that will help you retain that information better, also help you relax and help you sleep better. And so that's the simple toddler routine for sleep that I think can help everybody.
It's a great routine. Hard to argue with that. So you had mentioned earlier that, children are really good at saying, or toddlers are really good at saying no to something that they don't want to do. And so that's something, especially early career physicians could benefit from more of, because we get so trained to say yes to everything that you don't realize it until it's too late, and usually way too late, that you've hit this inflection point in your career. And now you're saying yes to everything and you've taken on too much, and it's super stressing you out, and you don't recognize that there always will be more opportunities. So then it's time to start saying no. So aside from that, because your book was written for a general audience, what are some pearls that you can give us that you would apply specifically to physicians like us?
Yeah, I think one of and it goes back to what I learned from this book, is really incorporating play back into our lives. And we can talk about this more a little bit later, I think, in different contexts. But for me, as a physician, what that really meant is having, really that decade of pre-med, med school, residency, plus more. I did 2 fellowships. Really took so much time away from things I used to love to do. And getting back in touch with our childhood selves or even teenage selves and getting those activities back that we love to do is, I think, something we can learn from little kids. And so for me personally, that was drumming. I used to always, as a little kid, just be drumming on things that eventually turned into a drum set and being in bands and school bands. And that kind of went away when I went to college. And so recently, when I had my little one, she's kind of into that too, with the pots and pans when she was a toddler. And that kind of reminded me of, wow, that's something I used to love. And I signed up for a hand drumming class and I got myself a hand drum. And, having that experience of drumming with other people and with her when I got home was really special. So I hope that physicians can really tap into those things or activities in terms of play that they used to love to do. I think that would be one really special thing.
Yeah, especially when I hang out with my kids, I'm not as good as that as I should be. Like when I hang out with them, it's always about skill building. Let's go shoot a basketball around. Let's go kick a soccer ball around. Let's go for a bike ride. Let's do something that's going to be skill building. And I'm really not good at playing. Often it's because I don't quite understand the rules of whatever game that they're playing, because they always seem to be changing. But
that's key.
but which means I just need to loosen up and lighten up a little bit. So, I think recognizing play for the sake of play is just, it's what life is all about, right? And so
I just love the way you put that. It's really, we get into this goal-oriented mode of everything we do, even play, and we just need to let go of that, have rules that are flexible, like you said, with your kids, and that's what we need to get to.
So when you talk about play and playfulness in kids, in the book, it takes a bit of a turn, right? And so you make this point. You talk about the importance of playfulness,
Yeah.
And then you make the point that those who are more playful are more likely to have BDSM related sexual activities.
Yeah.
So it was interesting how you went from Squish the Peas to
Yeah.
using a ball gag. So can you explain that transition to the audience?
Well, I want to thank you for going through the book in such detail. I've had a lot of interviews and no one has ever asked me about that. So I'm really glad you picked up on that.
Well,
And
in
that's great.
400 plus interviews, this is my first opportunity to say ball gag on the show.
That's great. So, what if we just focus on toddlers for a second, what they're really, really good at is building relationships. They do this in all kinds of ways. Laughter is one of the ways, play is another way. And they use play as really a relationship building tool. And so the same thing has been shown for adults, for people who have wonderful, great, strong, nurturing relationships. There's a great German psychologist, if anyone's interested in reading his work, his name's Rene Preuer. And what he's done is kind of broken down adult play into 4 domains. And when I tell you about them, you'll kind of recognize toddlers in there too. So the first is other directed, really wanting to engage with others. The next is lightheartedness, so not taking things seriously. There's intellectual, where you want to kind of have creative solutions to problems. And then there's whimsical, where you're just kind of amused by oddities. And so he's used this model in all types of studies with adult relationships. And he's shown that it strengthens our relationships. And what that does when we have stronger relationships and more playfulness is that we become more open, and kind of like what we were talking about, we lose some of that rigidity or some of those rules, and we build this trust with the other person. And what that allows us to do is open up. And so when we open up, that can also, I think, translate into the bedroom and for our sex lives as well. And so that's why play in a very different adult context is helpful for our sexual lives as well.
So just another way where it's like, Brad, loosen up. That's the big takeaway. Brad, loosen up. Loosen
Exactly.
up. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, a little tightly wound. Okay. Okay. So let's get back to more physician specific stuff. And so one of the things
Yeah.
you talk about is team building, and whether we're like in a leadership position for a hospital or a healthcare system, and we're trying to build a team, or we're in private practice and we need to surround ourselves with good people. We spend some time, and maybe not enough time, in medicine on team building. And so what can
Yep.
we learn from toddlers about team building?
For me personally, this was my favorite chapter to write, and still is, because I just learned so much from them about how they operate in teams. They're very different from adults, where they're very focused on the other person and working with that person rather than the goal, like we are. And not that we shouldn't be focused on the goal, but what has been shown in the adult literature is if we do that and we focus on the teamwork and the things outside of the goal, then we actually achieve those goals better. So what am I talking about exactly? So great study by Sandy Pentland. He's a researcher at MIT. He puts sociometric badges on people, and all this thing does is measures how close we are to people, who we're talking to, some of our hand gestures, but doesn't actually record what we're saying. And so from this, they allowed people to get together and then did a pitch competition a couple of days later. And with 86% accuracy, without even knowing what was said, they were able to predict the winners because of 3 things: the energy, the engagement, and exploration. So it was really those communication skills, bringing that energy to communication with hand gestures, the engagement with other people, and exploration in terms of talking to other teams was super useful. And I'll let you respond to that, and then I have a little bit more to say on what to do when someone stops working.
Oh no, please continue.
Okay.
Like if you've got a team member, right? Because
No.
we have a set, and I think it'll tie into our sense of justice, which we're going to get into in a little bit, right? Because if we have a team member who's not working, I think our tendency is to respond pretty dramatically because
Yes.
we adults have a pretty strong sense of fairness and
Yep.
justice. And
Yep.
so is that what you're getting at? Is that what we can learn from toddlers about that?
Yeah, similar, and they respond very differently, like you said. So wonderful experiment. Toddler is matched with an adult. They're given a joint task. They both know what the task is, and then they just have the adult stop what they're doing. And so the toddler is left with looking at this person who's just staring at them. They have a task to do. What do I do with someone who's stopped working? And they're just incredible people. First, what they do is look at that person and address them very directly. So in toddler language, man, because that's the person they know. And then they give them just simple instructions, like this is what you're supposed to do, lift it, if that's the task. The person's still not responding. They walk over there very nicely. They just kind of show them what to do. They're not having any judgment. They're just showing them, telling them what to do. They're using language like please. And what's really fascinating, because toddlers get a bad reputation for tantrums, we can talk about that. It's brief. It's part of their lives. I like to focus on everything else they do well. But when things fail equipment-wise, like what they're actually using, for us, I translate that into computer failures. They don't lose it. They don't have any tantrums. They have barely a little bit of emotional reactivity because they see that as, this happened. How do we continue to work together? And they just continue to do that. And what I really love about them, and it kind of gets into their sense of justice, is what they do when rewards come. So when rewards come, they will protest if they get less rewards than another person. But what's really special about them is that if they get the rewards and they notice that their partner hasn't gotten any, they will take that and share that equally. And it's just a very beautiful way of working in a team and then sharing rewards and how they think.
What if their partner didn't do anything and just was one of those people that sat there?
Yeah.
And how do they redistribute the awards?
Interesting.
Are
So
they
they won't give them.
socialists or are they communists?
they won't give them if they haven't participated at all. So they run those experiments. They're smart.
So they're not communists. Okay, so that's their sense of justice and fairness. But let's say they have someone. Do they have any sense of vengeance? Right?
Yeah. So it's interesting that does start to emerge kind of in the range that I talk about in the book. So I'm focused on toddlers and preschoolers, so 1 to 5. And I would say toddlers definitely don't. And it starts kind of in that preschool range where you're like 4 to 5. So my favorite experiment is the lever experiment, where there's 2 levers. If you pull lever 1, you get a sticker. If you pull lever 2, then we both get a sticker. And so the toddler is there with an adult. The adult is just pulling lever 1, taking all of the stickers for themselves. And the toddler is just watching, not getting any stickers. And as you know, a sticker is a high value item for a little kid.
More than gold.
More than gold, more than anything, except maybe a cracker. But those two kind of even out. And so with the toddler's given a chance after seeing this, after seeing someone else take all the stickers. And not all the time. They're not perfect. That's not what I'm arguing. But more often than not, they will pull lever 2 because they want both people to get a sticker, even after they've been shown what the other person is doing and is being very selfish.
Interesting. Some of the stuff that we talk about on this show is personal finance related, right? Like how we're going to spend our money, how we're going to not overspend, how we're going to save, how, financial independence is the goal for everybody. The FIRE movement, financial independence, retire. And so part of that is we have to know about hedonic adaptation so that we don't spend our money on stuff that's not going to actually bring us joy or make us happy. So like that fancy car, right, is the prime example. You buy the new attending car and then you're paying, a ton of money a month for something that was really fun to shop for and brought you joy for a month or two. But after that, it just becomes your car, right? You've got a new state of being. And so you talk about hedonic adaptation with respect to giving, which is different. Which is different, right? It's kind of a lack of adaptation. So what can toddlers teach us about hedonic adaptation and giving?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So first I'll say that after doing this work and looking back at 20 years of data, I will unequivocally say that toddlers are the kindest people in society. They are just givers naturally. They always want to be helping, and it helps bring them a lot of happiness. And when we look at studies that have been done with facial recognition, they get so much joy, and so do we, but they get so much joy out of sharing things that they have. And so how does that translate to adults? Hedonic adaptation is a big problem because we want these things, and we get a little bit of spike of happiness. It kind of goes away. We're back to our baseline. We lose a lot and have payments for many years while our happiness is back to baseline. But giving is very, very different. And these are studies in adults now. So University of Chicago, they had 2 groups of adults. They gave one group of adults the same amount of money every day. Hedonic adaptation kicks in, where they're happy the first day, goes down over time. The second group, they told them, here's the money, but you give it to another person. And their happiness didn't go down. It was incredible. Repeat experiment. This time you tell the second group to give to charity. And their happiness goes down a little bit, but at half the rate of the people who are getting the money themselves. And so there's a different type of happiness called eudaimonic happiness. And that's the happiness we get from giving because it taps into what we feel is our true self, getting to our purpose. And so when we do this type of giving, and it does not have to be charity like we're talking about money directly. It can be volunteer, doesn't even have to be a formal volunteer activity. It can be any type of volunteer acts. That gives us a type of happiness that doesn't go away the more times we do it.
Interesting. I remember the saying said, money can't buy happiness has clearly not given away enough.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of
Yeah.
happiness, something that I've spoken about a couple times in the show is about how to make patients laugh. Right?
Yes.
How to make patients laugh. Definitely check out those episodes. I've had a couple of comedians on the show and we go
Nice.
through different ways to make patients laugh, how to have that framework. And so what have you learned from the book about why we should be doing that? What's the big incentive here for making patients laugh?
Yeah. So one of the reasons toddlers do it so much, and I'll just say they're so much better at it than us. Put toddlers together, just record them, and then put adults together. They're laughing more than twice as much as we are. And so one of the things, like I talked about, what their primary goals is building relationships. That's why they're playing with people. That's why they're making other people laugh and why they want to laugh in groups. And so I see it in the physician-patient relationship as a relationship building tool that builds that trust. It builds that happiness. It makes people more relaxed. And why I really like this question is that I go through a little bit through this in the book as well, but laughter makes us better learners. So if we laugh before we're getting new information, we retain that information better. So we as physicians, if we're able to make our patients laugh and then tell them the information that we need and we know how much of that stays with them, they will retain more of that. And so I think that is another reason why we should be really doing as much as we can. And I'm so glad that you've had people on giving tips on that because it's not always the easiest thing, but it's a very important thing to do.
Right? What's the point of saying all this stuff during the visit if they're not going to remember it? Right?
Yep, exactly.
It's like, well, it's not, some people may think, well, it's not my problem to make them remember it. It's my problem just to tell it. And whether they choose to remember it or not, well, no. I mean, then what's the point of even saying it to begin with if you know they're not going to remember some of it? So I think there is some responsibility there. Like, I'm not saying everyone needs to start making their patient laugh. I'm just saying, push your limits a little bit. Push your limits a little bit. It'll actually make it more enjoyable visit for you. So there's one more thing I want to ask about because I have a personal story about it. Is that my youngest? So we have a pool in our backyard, and two older brothers already know how to swim. They're in the deep end of the pool. The youngest he's got to be like 2.5, and he is on the steps in the shallow end. And he didn't know my wife was recording the video, but she's recording him. And he goes, "You can do this. You can do this." And then on the steps where he can stand, he's just kind of like moving himself laterally. So you can see him kind of like mimicking the swimming motions and psyching himself up. And, he can't sink very far because his head's above water. But still, he's like practicing the motions that he sees his brothers doing. And he's getting swim lessons too. And so he's really talking to himself. And then we have another video towards the end of the summer where he's in the deep end swimming, and the middle brother turns around and he goes, "Holy cow, he's swimming. He's in the deep end." So, so then when I read that in your book about why we should be talking to ourselves, I was like, oh my God, I have that on video about how effective that can be. It's a toddler thing. So, okay. So tell us about why we as adults should be talking to ourselves more.
That is a beautiful story. I talk about one story where there's a little girl named Auburn Sage going down her snowboard on a mountain and talking to herself through that. But I easily
think
could
I've seen
have
that on
used
Instagram.
Your kid's story is just as good. And, they're incredible people. They have this thing called private speech, which is talking to yourself out loud. And it's just a thing that all toddlers do all the time, whether people are around or not. And it helps them in a lot of different ways. It helps them guide them through tasks. It helps them encourage themselves. It helps them give themselves performance feedback. And all these things that, like I was talking about, learning is so important to them. This is one of the ways they can help themselves learn. this naturally goes away as we get out of preschool time. And now when we're adults, it's called silent speech, and it's in our head and we don't talk out loud to ourselves. But we can still, really use the power of this self-talk to help us. And there's a lot of wonderful data with adults. And I think it's one of the most important lessons and most interesting lessons we can learn from toddlers. And the key for your listeners is to talk to yourself in second or third person. So really use your name. So one of the things that it can do is it decreases our emotional reactivity. We get frightened or scared or nervous. But if we say our actual name, then we can actually decrease the emotional reactivity parts of our brain. So one great example is fMRI studies. Adults are put into the machine and they're shown aversive images like a dog bearing down. And then, you ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Or what is Hasan feeling right now? And right away, there's a difference in how we're feeling. And so when we have those stressful situations, for some like me before, maybe it was public speaking, meeting new people, talking to ourselves in third person can be a way of helping ourselves relax. And another thing that's really helpful, and we see this a lot with physicians and others, is this negative self-talk. Something we did wrong, something we said that we didn't want to, maybe a mistake that we made. And we get into this negative self-talk cycle, and that can be very harmful, and it certainly doesn't help us and makes things worse. And so one great tip that I have for listeners is you can do that. That's fine. You can give yourself feedback, but do it as if you were talking to your best friend. So just taking that mental step back from I all the time can really just change the language that we're using and really help us, like I said, with emotional reactivity and how we're responding to our own actions.
That's amazing advice. That's something that I think we should be giving to our patients too, because a lot of times, right? Like one of the best predictors of a habit change we talked about earlier is self-efficacy, is what you believe in yourself. And one of the things that you can sabotage yourself with is this negative self-talk. And so when patients come out with the negative self-talk in the office, this is a great opportunity for you to help them with that. Be like, listen, you're an amazing person. I don't appreciate you talking about yourself that way. And then let me give you this tip. This is what I learned from my friend, Dr. Murali. He said that toddlers have this thing called private speech where they talk to themselves, and it can actually help us. So the next time you think about talking to yourself negatively like that, I want you to use your own name, and I want you to think about something that you would say to one of your friends in that circumstance. And I think those are great opportunities for these little nudges that we can give patients that'll really push them in a better direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm lucky I get to work with little ones, so they're doing it naturally. But yeah,
yes, you won't have to work with them on
adults, but it's great.
You're telling a toddler, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't worry, you'll be making bowel movements in the potty soon. Amazing. So Dr. Hasan Merali, sleep well, take risks, squish the peas, secrets from the science of toddlers for a happier, more successful way of life. And you also have a TEDx talk. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it just came out. Something I was very excited about. I talk about some of the topics in the book for 10 minutes, and it was done at the University of Toronto back in January. It just came out 2 weeks ago because there was a lot of editing that went into it. It was a very fascinating process. It got selected as an editor's pick. And so, if you go to the main TEDx page, it'll be there right now, and you can find it. And please watch it and share it. Hopefully, you can learn a lot from it.
Fantastic. Dr. Hasan Merali, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Thanks for listening. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.